community in opposition to the Bay Delta Conservation Plan and current draft of the Delta Stewardship Council Plan. In reviewing the purpose and approach of the DBCP, I was struck by the second paragraph, which reads, "The DBCP attempts to balance contributions to the conservation of species in a way that is feasible given by a variety of important uses in the Delta, including flood protection, agriculture, and recreation, to name a few. The plan is undergoing intensive environmental review in the form of a state EIR and federal EIS to evaluate the impact of the plan on all aspects of the environment, including the human environment, and identify alternatives and potential mitigation actions. I would like to talk about the negative effects these plans will have on the human environment. The Delta community and economy has and will continue to depend on agriculture to provide the lifeblood for its continued existence. You can take my word for it or read the Delta Protection Commission's Economic Sustainability Plan. Agriculture provides the funding for our schools, churches, libraries, and service organizations, which are the social, spiritual, and cultural forces that sustain and shape the people of the Delta. I have firsthand knowledge of what I'm telling you today. I have read the ledgers, seen the receipts, and have the photos and the stories from the mouths of our past generations and the past 150 years which our family has thrived in the Delta. They chose to settle in the Delta because of the rich soil. The Delta is the largest concentration of prime farmland in this state. They also chose to move there because of the reliable water supply to irrigate their crops. We have continued to improve both the natural and the human environment for 6 generations now. This has provided jobs. Our family established and funded our reclamation district,
your
local
time
service
is up,
organizations.
so if you would just finish that sentence or last sentence.
I'd like to tell you that what I think is one of the biggest issues here is that continuing to remove water from the Delta will destroy the Delta, will decimate the Delta. And I think that the BDCP has been disingenuous at best. I kind of prefer to say dishonest because I believe it's analogous to saying you plan on improving the patient's health in the cardiac unit by decreasing the blood flow.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time and listening to our voices.
Yes.
My name is Peter Stone, and my written comments in more detail were given to your staff yesterday. And appreciate the opportunity to provide impact information about me and the Delta communities. I live in the north part of the Sacramento River Delta, adjacent to the Sacramento River on a 20-acre working farm in a home built by one who came to California to participate in the California Gold Rush in 1849 as a gold miner. He purchased my property in 1857, where he lived for 44 years, engaging in farming and fruit raising. DWR and the California Water Commission at the Resolution of Necessity hearings have specifically identified my home and property as where BDCP intake pumping station number 1 is slated to be placed, notwithstanding comments that we heard earlier that they're just options at this point. The Sacramento Bee actually put a front page article in the February 20th paper on our property and our situation just to highlight the impacts on people. I don't support the current form of the BDCP for a few reasons. In summary, I don't believe that BDCP has been set up to do the least private damage for the greatest possible public good, and should be significantly changed to ensure that in addition to all environmental impacts that are being considered, that the people in Delta community impacts be really considered as well. Second, as has been said, so I won't go into it, but it does not appear through the meetings that we've seen that there really is best science being involved in what's going on, particularly since the options continue to just focus on North Delta intakes and conveyance that could achieve dual goals without much harm to the Delta don't seem to be being considered. Those are my concerns about BDCP. Third, in a different vein, if BDCP is approved, there is an issue that I want to bring up about the financial cloud that hangs over the Delta's 500,000 acres for approximately 8+ years, assuming a couple of 3 years before eminent domain takes place. and it will not result in a fair payment to those whose land is taken through eminent domain due to the depressed values over those 8 years by virtue of all publicity and hearings about the project stating specific and general intents to take over 25% of the Delta land for the entire project. Specifically, for years now, maps have shown my property under intake number 1, and there are 4 others in a similar situation, and has been officially labeled as such in writing by the CWC and DWR. Due to the required disclosures that I would have to make to a potential buyer about this project, I effectively have not been able to sell my property for many years. That effectively is a taking of my property already, as with many, many other property owners in the Delta. With this similar situation facing over 113,000 acres, more than 25% of the Delta, supposed fair market values cannot be fair when the final taking actually occurs some years hence.
One sentence and that's it.
Okay. So my proposal is simply to have a BDCP fair compensation fund of 2.5% to be used in addition to the eminent domain, which would raise the cost from $12.7 billion to $13.0 billion on the water conveyance.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chair Pavley, Senator Wolk, committee members, Barbara Berrigan-Priya with Restore the Delta, thank you for holding this hearing. The Delta Coalition stands united today to ensure that the estuary and its communities do not become the scapegoat for the long-standing failure of California to fairly allocate its limited water resources and protect its environment. Now that the details of the BDCP are emerging, it's clear that, 1, it will not lead to the recovery of listed fish species, but will in fact increase the risk of extinction for some fish species. 2, the enormous cost of transporting Sacramento River water under the Delta will impose a stunning burden to Southern California water ratepayers who would pay 3 times more for water. 3, the technical analysis of the BDCP fails to meet minimum standards for credible scientific analysis, as it does not look fully at a full range of proposals. 4, water bonds to pay for mitigation will further increase the state's heavy debt burden and take away even more needed funding from public schools and health and human services. With the 5th draft of the Delta Plan up for public scrutiny, it, along with recently released BDCP documents, make it clear that state agencies are more worried about delivering water to the top 1% of agribusiness corporations in the San Joaquin Valley than fixing the levees for the safety of Delta residents and restoring flows for fisheries. The Delta Stewardship's plan is essentially no plan at all. Other than local land use restraints, it's a simple hodgepodge of possible future activities. Escalating costs in the billions and the BDCP's technical obstacles are the likely reasons so many project proponents are now aggressively supporting H.R. 1837, a federal bill that would decimate 150 years of water law and 30 years of species protections. We believe this would not be happening if state agencies would recognize that improved levees and local water efficiency projects are the most economical approaches to increasing water supply while protecting the estuary. BDCP and the Council cannot achieve their stated purposes if they continue to ignore and refuse to conduct a comprehensive social economic analysis for California on the project. The BDCP and the Council continue to refuse to conduct the comprehensive water quality available analysis that would eliminate paper water from the system. They cannot achieve their goals because they claim they have no responsibility to balance the public trust in both plans as they stand right now. And 4th, both plans ignore California water rights law. California's water crisis cannot be effectively resolved by draining the Delta for West Side and Southern San Joaquin agribusiness corporations to export almonds to China.
And if you could finish
I've got it. California's water cannot be managed any longer at the expense of the estuary and the social economic needs of the majority of Californians. Thank you.
Point well taken. Mr. Davis, hello.
Good morning, Chairwoman Pavley, members. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm here today on behalf of the Eastern Municipal Water District.
Okay.
Eastern Municipal Water District is a MET agency. They provide water, wastewater, and recycled water for about 550-mile area on the west side of the Riverside County. They are at this particular time and have for several years been receiving approximately 50% of the water through the Delta. They are also very aggressively pursuing local water development through a very aggressive water recycling program. They currently recycle about 80% of their wastewater. They also have a very aggressive conservation program, which includes a pricing policy through an inverted rate that also encourages efficient use of water. I'd like to incorporate by reference the comments that Mr. Patterson made about the BDCP. I would also like to raise a couple of concerns about the current draft of the Delta Stewardship Council's Delta Plan. As I mentioned, Eastern Municipal Water District is very aggressively pursuing local water development options, and we don't think that the plan adequately reflects that in their draft. Moreover, it goes a little too far, and it goes way too far, actually, in allowing the Delta Stewardship Council to review local water supply planning. We think that should be reserved for the local elected officials that our ratepayers vote into office and not a statewide agency. Our other particular concern with the plan is it focuses, we believe, way too much on the flow criteria, does not provide sufficient and adequate review of the other Delta stressors that are affecting the Delta. And with that, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to provide comments.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. I'm taking time off from work this morning, and I'm one of the lucky ones.
Your name?
My name is Barbara Daly. So many of my fellow residents in the Sacramento River Delta would like to attend these meetings, but not necessarily could do so during the day. I have a 2.5-page letter that I'd like to read, and as I stated, my name is Barbara Daly.
It's 14-page font. We probably won't have time for 2.5 pages, but why don't you go ahead and start, and I'm going to cut you off, and if you'd like to submit it, we would like to read it.
Thank you very much. I'm going to speak as what I see are the four main players: Delta Plan, Bay Delta Conservation Plan, the work of the Delta Stewardship Council, and the people of California. This is really not all about saving the fish, such as the Delta smelt or the endangered Central Valley salmon, etc., nor is it about the farmers of the Central Valley versus the farmers of Northern California. It is not about who is right. This is about what is right. The co-equal goals can be achieved by doing what is right and taking the who out of this equation. It is the who and choosing sides that is taking so much time trying to decide who is right, who should win, that we have lost sight of the real problem, creating a reliable water supply and protecting the environment in California. However, we should never lose sight that as California goes, the rest of the nation goes. This is a quote from the 111th Congress in their April session. California has a history of being a bellwether state in the Union. As the BDCP and DSC look to create new habitat by mitigating our present habitat, and also as a more than casual observer living in the Delta, Northern Delta, not maintaining the levees or habitat that we presently have for almost 2 years now, why can't we do this? Why can't we maintain and enhance the Sacramento River Delta? Why did farmers buy inexpensive land in the dry area of California and then demand water to farm it? There are thousands of acres of farmable land in Northern California. Rather than displacing farmers and families that have paid equitable prices to create and develop a living to feed our families and our nation, why can't the Central Valley farmers be displaced? Why can't they be given eminent domain money for their land, which will be unfarmable in 20 years anyway, to relocate to an area with better water conditions? Why? Because of what Dr. Jeffrey Mount, co-author of the PPIC and professor at UC Davis, told the Northern California people when he spoke to us 2 years ago, that water is worth more than agriculture in California. So my next question is, to who? As a living, breathing person, and the others in the assembly, I would say that water and agriculture are equally important to me and my family and to the generations that will follow me. Why can't farming move to Northern California? Why can't we subsidize farmers who want to irrigate responsibly with drip irrigation where practical? A study was done that showed recently, and I sent this to Senator Pavley and Senator Wolk 2 years ago, and others that aren't here today that were on that committee, if California farmers use drip irrigation where appropriate, California would save enough water to fill Hetch Hetchy 16 times every year. I, as a citizen of California...
You have one sentence, and then, again, would welcome your letter be submitted for the record.
As A Commissioner Karamara has said, that the Delta is the breadbasket of San Francisco. Governor Newton Booth said, and I will quote him from a book that I have brought here in his speeches.
Your time is up. We're up to 3:15, and we're running out of time here, and we have 20 people standing.
It will be a calamity to put this in private hands. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Dan Bacher. I'm editor of the Fish Sniffer magazine, and I have two requests of this committee today. First, I urge the committee to request the state and federal governments to remove from the BDCP any alternatives for the peripheral canal or any other conveyance other than the current through Delta flows. There is no doubt that increased water exports out of the Delta through a channel or peripheral canal will only result in the extinction of Central Valley steelhead, Sacramento River Chinook salmon, green sturgeon, Delta and longfin smelt, Sacramento splittail, and striped bass, now officially classified by the state of California as a native species. Second, I have revealed in my articles that Susan Ramos, a Westlands Water District official, is working for the Department of Water Resources on the BDCP, as is Laura King Moon of the State Water Contractors Association. These are clear, egregious conflicts of interest. I urge you to conduct a legislative hearing to investigate these and other conflicts of interest under the Bay Delta Conservation Plan process. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, that had been brought to our attention before.
Good morning. My name is Osha Meserve, and I'm here on behalf of local agencies of the North Delta, which is a coalition of 11 reclamation and water districts in the northern part of the Delta, covering over 70,000 acres of farmland and communities. And we're working to protect local interests as we address statewide water needs and attempt to restore the fisheries. Want to support the comments of the Mayor of Stockton and the Restore the Delta in particular, try to add to those. I want to say process-wise, first of all, we still have the same concerns that we've had going back to 2008 in terms of whether stakeholders' concerns are being meaningfully taken into account with the BDCP. Moreover, the statewide concerns regarding financing of this project still have not been addressed. And in particular, from a local perspective, there are still no local benefits that would be typical of a habitat conservation plan that the BDCP purports to be. There's only detrimental taking of farmland, threatening local water supplies, disruption of communities, and devastating the local economy. So we would look for a Bay Delta conservation plan to have local benefits and provide those things. And we've been working with BDCP proponents on those for years, but still we have not seen progress on that front. Now, despite the severe impacts on local communities in the Delta, the most recent effects analysis, Chapter 5 of the BDCP, as others have mentioned, still shows that the tunnel being proposed will have actually adverse effects to aquatic, terrestrial, and bird species, including the Delta smelt. In particular, the Northern Diversion Facility, these documents show, will not even reduce entrainment of smelt and salmon, which is what we thought we were trying to avoid by moving an intake to the northern part of the Delta. Thus, the tunnel is not a conservation measure, and there is no justifiable reason why alternatives, such as through Delta conveyance, aren't being looked at, because there aren't biological benefits of the tunnel that have been purported. To be valid, the BDCP itself, not just the environmental review in the form of the EIR, EIS, must look at non-diversion alternatives, as well as alternatives that divert water in the western part of the Delta after the flows have had a chance to provide the benefits to the Delta communities, as well as the fish and the environment. Thank you. I'm going to provide you a copy of a letter that we did jointly with a bunch of environmental interests regarding the severe impacts on farms and bird species in the Delta, and I'll give that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. And if all of you that are still standing want to speak, I'm switching at 20 till the hour for the last two people who are going to sum up what after listening to everyone's presentation. So if you could keep your comments to about 2 minutes, we'll hear from everyone. If not, unfortunately, we won't have time for everyone to speak. So we're over here. So if you could keep it a little shorter.
Good morning. My name is Michael Brodsky. I'm speaking on behalf of Save the California Delta Alliance, a citizens group based in Discovery Bay, California. I got the water contractor's handout when I walked in the room here, And I think their fact and fiction is a good synopsis of what's going on, except they've got the fact and the fiction reversed. For example, fiction, state policymakers have not considered multiple options for fixing the Delta. Well, that's a fact. For example, they haven't considered an alternative of storm flow diversion. It's true that in the big winter storms, millions of acre-feet of water flow over the Tisdale Weir, the Fremont Weir, the Sacramento Weir. In a few days, enough water goes over those weirs to supply the water contractor's needs for an entire year. They have not looked at capturing that water, storing it, and diverting it during the summer when it's needed. Also, there's a little-known poor stepchild project in DWR called NODOS, North of Delta Offline Storage. That project would propose to divert storm flows from the Sacramento River through existing irrigation canals, store up to 1.4 million acre-feet, and then feed the water back into the river during the summer. Neither of these two things I mentioned are considered at all in the BDCP or the Delta Plan. The National Environmental Policy Act requires the agencies to take a hard look at all reasonably feasible alternatives. They've failed to do it.
Right.
Do I have any time left?
About 10 seconds if we're sticking to 2 minutes.
Well,
which would be appreciated. I think your comments are well taken, and we have...
I've got better ones.
A letter would be great.
I'll close with one anecdote. I heard anecdotally that one of Laura King Moon's duties at BDCP is to make conflict of interest determinations for other parties.
Okay. Well, there's a closing statement.
Amusing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. No. Don't encourage him.
Hello. Thank you for letting me having the opportunity to speak to you. My name is Albert Medvitz. I'm a farmer in Solano County on the western edge of the Delta in the Dryland Hills, in the Montezuma Hills. I'm a past member of the board of directors of the Farm Bureau, and I'm also a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science for my work in public understanding of science and policy, in sustainability in agriculture, protection of farms, and international development. My purpose today is to suggest to you that it's finally time to recognize the folly of continuing investment in the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. We heard earlier that the plan is in fact a project document. It's part of the continuing elaboration of the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project. It's a project document. And from the beginnings, the public purpose of these projects was to provide the industrial and commercial base to attract and support a burgeoning population in the state. They supplied the water initially for agriculture, and that became very large and complex. They then supplied the water for the urban areas as it supported the defense industries. It supported the computer and technology industries, tourism, and all kinds of manufacturing and commercial activity, including film and television. Now, historically, the praise of these projects was and is still is couched in terms of their importance to California agriculture.
And you have 1 sentence left.
However, we need to take into account all of this. It's written down that I put for you. In order to protect the future of the sustainability of the state, we have to follow on Senator Wolk's suggestion.
Sustainable ag, yeah.
That there must be the equivalent of a conservation easement on water, any water that's exported from anywhere, that it be maintained in agriculture, that it not be allowed to go to urban development in the future, and that we invest that $16 million.
Thank you very much for your testimony. That was a run-on sentence, but we'll move on here.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Kathy Miller. I live in the Delta, and I'm the Vice Mayor of the City of Stockton. I'm here today to stand united with Delta residents in opposition to the current BDCP and Delta plan. I'm sure you're all very aware of the issues facing Stockton. 2 weeks ago, our City Council voted to become the first California city to enter the AB 506 process in a last-ditch attempt to avoid municipal bankruptcy. So I'm sure you can imagine that there are many critical issues needing our attention back home in Stockton. However, none are more important than protecting our water. And so both the mayor and I are here today to demonstrate Stockton's commitment to the Delta Coalition in protecting our Delta and the vital role it plays in our economy. San Joaquin County has been unfairly portrayed as a poor steward of this vital resource, and our ongoing efforts to protect it are largely being ignored. San Joaquin County has an approved habitat mitigation plan, which has been successfully operating for 10 years. We also have a successful ag mitigation plan, and soon Stockton will be one of the first Valley cities with a climate action plan. We care deeply about our environment, and we have been working for a long time to protect it. We live in a county that struggles with some of the highest foreclosure and unemployment rates in the nation. Agriculture is the lifeblood of our economy, and the Delta is the backbone of that agriculture. Stockton is the 13th largest city in California, and this is not about the Delta counties just saying no. It's about us having a meaningful voice in this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your attendance. Over here.
Hi, thanks for inviting us and for listening. My name is Jeff Hart. I'm a Delta resident, Delta environmentalist, Delta farmer, and somebody who's very much involved with the tourism industry. I want to make 2 points based on the experience I've had in the Delta. Leading boat eco tours, I have lots of people come out to enjoy the beauty of the Delta, and when I ask them, well, what do you hear about the Delta? The first thing that comes to mind is the concern about taking water, too much water out of their region to some other place. So this, to me, seems like it's kind of an ethical and moral issue for many Northern Californians. The second point I'd like to bring out is my experience with doing habitat restoration in the Delta. We talk about the 2 equal goals. Well, what type of environment or habitat are we talking about? When we first entered into this discussion several years ago, there were some people that suggested that we should return the Delta to a salty environment, to which it has never been. As an example of how science can progress, a number of us took to task a number of those people, some scientists, and we beat that down. And the lead fish scientist at UC Davis publicly acknowledged in an article to the Sacramento Bee that the Delta started out as freshwater. The Delta is a freshwater environment, and we must keep it that way. And I think the people of the Delta would be more open to suggestions about projects if there's some assurance that we can protect this environment. Here's what I suggest. We need a Delta Bill of Rights that guarantees a certain water quality and water quantity. And I think if one made those assurances, we might be interested in other alternatives.
Good point.
How can we agree unless we know what the outcome is going to be?
Thank you very much. Over here.
Good morning, Chair Pavley and committee members. My name is John Beckman. I'm the CEO of the Building Industry Association of the Delta. Our association is a member of the Unified Delta Coalition, and this morning I would simply like to echo the comments of County Supervisor Larry Rustaller and Mayor Ann Johnston. We support the comments from the Delta Coalition.
Thank you.
My name is Jennifer Fisher. I'm an investment advisor for a large Wall Street bank. I live in Berkeley, California. I have 2 properties out in Bethel Island. I oppose the BDCP or any plan that diverts fresh water from the Delta. Any such plan would have a disastrous effect on the Delta and surrounding areas, would have a negative impact on local economy, affecting small businesses, family farmers, the fishing and recreation industry, lower property values, not to mention the killing of fish and natural species population by the intrusion of salt water that these plans would create. Hear that giant sucking sound? That is Northern California being drained of its most valuable resource, water, so that Southern California can continue its profitable endeavor of growing crops in the desert. Southern California needs to develop and build alternative sources of water, not pull on fresh water away from what is now being grown in that area is cotton and food products being shipped to China. Northern California can't support sprawling growth of industry and population in Southern California and should not be expected to do so. Conservation and keen water management needs to be employed by Southern California to meet its needs. Water will continue to grow as a precious resource and valuable commodity, and Northern California needs to protect it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Katie Patterson. I'm with the San Joaquin Farm Bureau, but I'm also a member of the 5-County Delta Coalition of the 5-County Farm Bureaus. So we represent quite a large membership that is resident up in the Delta. First, I'd like to echo Supervisor Larry Roostaller's comments, Mayor Ann Johnson, Vice Mayor Kathy Miller, and then also OSHA Reserve's comments as well. So I'd like to put that out there. One of the things that we've been experiencing with BDCP over the last, it feels about 5 years now, is property rights, and that's clearly at the forefront of a number of folks in this room. It is one of our most dear vested rights, and we are very watchful over that. Part of our changes and transitions in our water issues in California led to the legislation in 2009. And in that, we have a lot of mention today about the co-equal goals, but we've failed to continue on that sentence where it talks about agriculture and the protection and preservation of that, even though it may be in an evolving place. We want to make sure that agriculture isn't evolved out of the Delta because it is a critical role in this state, as is agriculture across the state as a whole. California sometimes forgets that we are the backbone of this state, and in good times and bad, agriculture continues to keep us moving forward. So we'd like to just make mention of that and to keep the rest of the statute in mind as we move forward in these critical processes that can be very daunting and spreading many of us very thin.
Thank you very much. Yes, we're very appreciative of the role agriculture plays in our state's economy. Cindy? Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Pavley. Cindy Tuck with the Association of California Water Agencies. On BDCP, I'd just like to make 2 short points and then hit a few points on the Delta Plan. On BDCP, we think this process is critical to achievement of the co-equal goals. It's important to the state as a whole. Second point is we just want to highlight that we do think the Brown administration has improved the process for BDCP, and we commend them for that. So on Delta Plan, I wanted to mention that we're part of the coalition that was referenced earlier. This is the Ag Urban Coalition. As part of that coalition, we've provided comments at multiple times, including an alternate plan. I just hit 4 points, 4 issues that we've submitted in the process. One is we think it's important for the council to embrace a facilitator role, help the agencies get out of their silos and work together to be successful. 2, we think the plan needs to be more action-oriented, and in our comments in the alternate plan, we've provided examples of specific actions. 3rd, we think it's important that key terms be clarified. A couple examples on that: covered action, and then another one, consistency in the context of consistency determinations. Finally, flow objectives, very important part of this process. The Water Board sets those, but as the state looks at it, it's important to consider all the factors: ecosystem protection, fish protection, but also water supply reliability and hydropower. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Chairwoman Pavley. And members of the committee, my name is Alan Shanahan. I'm the Executive Vice President of ASME Local 1902. I represent about 75% of the employees of Metropolitan Water District, as well as 6 other municipal water agencies in Southern California. I wanted to speak specifically in support of the Bay Delta Plan and the conservation project. I know I'm the minority here, but the big key thing for the labor side is the job production that could come out of this. We feel that Metropolitan's Delta Action Plan calls for a comprehensive, collaborative approach to the Delta that includes water delivery system and ecosystem improvements. We recognize how important the successful completion of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan is to all of California. Specifically, we recognize the significant benefits to the unemployed. Earlier reports last year from the Brattle Report by David Sunding in 2011 stated that it could create in excess of 129,000 jobs. Even if we cut that in half and took a conservative number, these are jobs, high-quality jobs that we cannot afford to pass up. California is in desperate need of jobs at this point in time. And we recognize that the Bay Delta Project has Californian jobs as well as the economy and the environment first in mind. The Delta Project, we feel, will benefit all of Californians, both northern and southern, and help us get closer back to the days of lower unemployment. We also recognize that with lower unemployment, revenues are higher and income for the state, and it can also help contribute to education, health, and safety programs throughout the state. We are confident that this process, with your leadership, the rest of the legislature, and the Brown administration will make historic decisions to improve California's water infrastructure in the months ahead and grow our economy, bringing us closer to the fruitful days.
And I want to thank you for your comments. Time is running out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your attendance. And we have about 6 people left, and I have about 6 minutes left, so we're down to about a minute each.
Jody Mazzarella, Delta homeowner in the Western Path. I stand here in opposition to the BDC and the Delta Plan. Conservation is for everybody in California, not just a group who want to continue to remove resources from the Delta that it does not have to give, and the rest of us here or in the sphere of the Delta cannot afford to let happen. I do not believe the BDCP has looked at all the impacts it wants to do, let alone the impacts it is currently doing to the ecosystem. The Delta is made up of peat, sand, and alluvium, and all are highly susceptible to liquefaction. Putting this tunnel through the Delta is of great concern for life and safety of the people that live in and near the Delta. One of my main concerns is the 24/7 impact of the movement of the water in that dual 33-foot pipe caused by water hamming and the potential of a man-made event such as an earthquake. Stand next to a train going down the tracks. Feel that force, the weight, the pressure, the force, the tonnage. That's almost the weight of that water moving through those pipes. This could collapse the levees and the tunnel if it's under it. The vibration impact of the drilling could also nick a spot in our aquifer system as well. When questioned, the BDC could not answer this. BDC says they will bore down about 150 feet to protect the effects of the earthquake. To do so, they would have to go down 1,000 feet per their own EIR study, which is Chapter 11.
And I know you're not going to have enough time to say all you want to say, but
history repeats itself. Look back
I would welcome a letter being sent in, and you have one sentence, and I need to move on. Otherwise,
history repeats
not
itself,
a long
and
one.
look back, you'll find water diversions all over that have failed, and those are now currently restoring the normal flows to fix what scientists said were a good idea. I oppose this project.
Thank you. Okay, I'll give that here. And moving on, about a minute would be great, because I want to hear from the two people who are going to sum up and have been listening to your testimony. We've allowed an hour. That's what I promised, and we're just there.
My name is Michael Frost. I live in the Bay Area, and I'm here to say that I stand with the Delta residents in opposition to the BDCP and the Delta Plan. I'm concerned about an overarching theme of privatizing gains, socializing losses. We've seen this play itself out in multiple ways in the banking crisis, in the economy, over and over and over. And, I'm looking at 19th and 20th century thinking of, long-term costs, short-term gains. And what we're doing now, we seem to be doubling down on those ancient ways of thinking. But now the long-term costs aren't that far out, and the short-term gains are marginal. I find it quite ironic that the corporate ag folks that are behind the destruction of this renewable resource, i.e. the fish, the Delta ecosystem, are selling almonds in China, are growing cotton in the desert, and are continuing to repeat these processes that have been proven over time in the last 100 years to be destructive.
I want to cut you off now because I need to, otherwise I can't hear from them. Thank you very much because you bring in an interesting perspective. You're welcome to submit your comments in writing.
Make one more sentence?
No, otherwise they can't say anything.
I'm Karen Fisher. I'm a property owner at Bethel Island and a water enthusiast. I just had one comment to make, which is I'm very dismayed at Supervisor Natelli that is not able to provide an assessment of the plan due to resources and funding. So I would ask him if he could do so that we can have a voice.
Yeah, I think he's hoping for a grant from DWR.
Good morning.
You for your comments.
I'll be quick. Tom Martinez, Santa Clara Valley Water District, representing the 1.8 million water users making up the greater Silicon Valley. Over half of our water supplies is imported and 40% conveyed through the Delta, as you are aware. So this topic is extremely important to us. We appreciate you bringing this to the attention, or giving it greater light, and we hopefully will be part of this process and remain supportive of this process for its duration. Thank you.
Thank you for your attendance today.
My name is Chris Gulick. My family moved to the Delta in Sherman Island in 1967. In 1967, Sherman Island was predominantly asparagus, tomatoes, and row crops. Now it's predominantly cattle and hay seasonally grown with a lack of fresh water. At the exact same period of time, Westlands was running cattle and raising hay in 1967. Now they're row crops, they're orchards, and the likes. This isn't about choosing fish versus farming or the Delta versus whatever. This is about picking and choosing winners with taxpayer dollars, which is not a role I think you should have, or anybody should have for that matter. And if we're going to make an honest assessment of this, if we're going to sacrifice the Delta for corporate agriculture in the Central Valley, let's just say it. Let's just be done with it. But right now, all we're doing is asking a farmer in the Delta to be less so that a farmer in the Central Valley can be more, and that is unconscionable. I can't see how we can reconcile that. So we need to get back to how much water is really surplus, how much is available for export, and stop right there and start this BDCP process over again.
All right.
And finally.
No, not appropriate. What you can do is, wave like that, and then we know you support him, but there's no loud interruption because you've cut off his
That's fine.
minute.
I'm going to very, very short. Mike Amon, San Joaquin Partnership. I'm in support of the Delta Coalition. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good way to end it perfectly. Thank you very much for your cooperation and flexibility and meeting my time constraints here. So let's have come up for the agency response. Phil Eisenberg, sitting in the back of the room. I knew he must be here. He's the chair of the Delta Stewardship Council and a former assembly member. And also coming up at the same time, Mark Cowan, Director, Department of Water Resources. You've heard a lot. 10 minutes each a response. I appreciate your attendance. Mr. Eisenberg, you've been here for both parts of this discussion. Welcome back.
Thank you very much, Chair. Members, appreciate being here a second time. Should I just defer to Mark since most of the comments were directed at BDCP?
We want to put him on the hot seat.
Well, just a couple of things. Your hearing today, as with your hearing last week, is not atypical of these, the way these hearings go. People come up, they legitimately view the perspective through how the impact occurs to them, and they want answers to a bunch of questions that most people would be deemed to be fair and reasonable. I just want to go back to what the legislature did in 2009, which is you broke about a 50-year legislative deadlock on major water policy issues. You adopted the co-equal goals for California as a fairly defined way of articulating state interest, and the state interest were more reliable water supply for California, all of California, and a protected, preserved, and restored Delta ecosystem, to be achieved in a way that recognizes the unique characteristics of the Delta. Now, that's a fairly major legislative effort that narrowed down what our state interest. Yes, there are inherent elements within those state interests, but that's the driver of the activity. You told us to do a bunch of things, but you basically said you wanted a management plan for the Delta that reflected the co-equal goals and the inherent objectives. I'll just address a couple of things. Our water supply is volatile. It's increasingly volatile. No one has said anything different, and it's an inherent fact that we all deal with. There's a relatively fixed supply of water. Thank God it is largely renewable, but as the demands increase for water, as the conservation programs improve, but they're going too slowly, at least in my judgment, it should not be surprising that there are competing demands for water and difficulties in achieving it. Even the best of managers are not able Mr. Cowan and his talented people are not able to order nature to comply with the requirements of human preferences. Right. We just can't do that. So, but, of course, the business of politics and government is at least to assume that you can lay out priorities and you can legislate that kind of stuff. In a natural resource, you have inevitable uncertainty. So I just want to mention three things. The discussion you engaged in early about the role of science in these decisions and the nature of certainty or uncertainty, fundamentally important. Look, I have not heard a single scientist in the last 7 or 8 years that I've been doing this Delta-related stuff, not one scientist who says, yeah, if you do what I recommend be done, I guarantee you to an absolute certainty that the following 20 things will occur. They won't say that. And, you know, in some sense, it's unfair to expect them to say that. Also, it's pretty clear that water experts, the water supply people, they say, well, look, here's our best guess of the water supply that it's going to be. Here's our best guess of what the demands are going to be. Yes, we sign contracts to supply water at a certain amount, but those contracts contain provisions that allow a reduction in the event of natural catastrophes, drought, or other things. There is a remarkable similarity between the operational system on the water side and the scientific ecosystem in terms of both of them expressing a sensible caveat. Guys, it's nature. And ultimately, you can't dictate to nature what it's going to be. You can try to adjust to variations in nature. You can try to build storage facilities, footnote, who wants to pay for it? Everybody wants them built, but nobody's stepping up to build them. You can do all those things, but the uncertainty is inherent. And one of the things that your 2009 legislation did, it seemed to me, is move the ball forward in a way it's been going slowly for some time. And that is to bring together water reliability and ecosystem in one place, and to also talk about scientific opinion and uncertainty on both sides of the equation. It is not easy to do, it is not simple to do, and it is not without immense controversy. In the political world, everyone wants science that agrees with their predetermined positions. That's my personal judgment. Whether you're a water district, whether you're an environmental organization, you'd prefer to have science that justifies what was your last comprehensive policy plan or resolution at your last annual convention. Boy, is that not what's going to happen in the future. But we have a significantly large supply of water in California, which, if adequately managed and honestly run, offers us a chance of getting through up to the year 2100 without major disruptions in the economy, and hopefully with significant improvements in the ecosystem. So for the Delta Plan, we have said complete BDCP. We have a potential appellate role regarding a piece of that, so we have very specifically not tried to prejudge that issue. I think that's one of the more important things. Let's put a proposal that has fleshed out details on the table for examination. That's what this preliminary, what do you call it, scoping draft or draft? Admin draft is really all about. And then that will be refined down into a more definitive document. Secondly, we have said that for the ecosystem and also for water supply reliability, you've got to have the Water Board execute its legal mandate to impose new water flow standards for the Delta. It's crazy to think you can build a system on water and ignore the fact that there's a long-standing legal obligation and a federal agency standing behind it likely to act on their own if we do not act, to have the Water Board do it. It is a balancing test for the Water Board, as all these tests are balancing for you and your interest. In addition, and I'll just make a couple of notes, great controversy to local elected officials in the Delta area is the fact that the Delta Plan has policies that they would prefer not to see, and they would prefer not to see the policies that relate to land use. But the Delta Plan specifically
said, Water Code Section 85022. It is the intent of the legislature that state and local land use actions identified as covered actions pursuant to Section so on be consistent with the Delta Plan. The section's findings, policies, and goals apply to Delta land use planning and development. Now, I know most of the folks who don't like that they opposed the legislation. I got that. But that's sitting there, and the language about covered actions is sitting there. It's not, I should say, Mayor Johnson from Stockton and I have debated this many times. Her likening our authority to a coastal commission on steroids, would it were true. They have direct permitting authority. We do not have direct permitting authority. That isn't the way it works. There's a certification process from a local agency if they think this is a covered action, and if somebody appeals it to the council, we hear it to determine consistency. That's a long way away from the heavy-handed actions described by some. Then just the last thing. We're aware with all the questions and debates and issues that are out there. Just this Friday, we posted our agenda material for the meeting, last Friday, for the meeting coming up this Thursday and Friday. And in there on the agenda item is a matrix, which is the first one we're going to produce, on staff proposed ideas, thoughts, and even some questions that might be reflected in the sixth draft Delta Plan. The fifth one was the one that went out and was the subject of comments. And that sixth draft will come out hopefully later this month, and it'll be these matrices are the way the council is going to be talking with the staff about some of the issues. Okay, you should coordinate local agencies. Okay, well, expand they're saying expand the discussion in the Delta Plan on coordination of agencies. Definition of terms, yes. Our process is pretty open. We think it's it's not perfect by any means, but it's a pretty good one. We'd encourage people, and many of the people you heard today have talked to us throughout our entire process. One thing you can't guarantee out of any process is that the results you desire in advance of the processing starting will always be determined. That's kind of like saying there are 38 million Californians. Every single person gets to veto every single action. It doesn't work that way. We move ahead. We try to do the best we can. We get better as the progress goes forward. Hopefully it's a balancing test, too, and there you are.
Yes, perfectly timed. And I'm sort of looking at Senator Wilk. Do you have time to wait 10 minutes, or would you like to?
Can I just ask Phil a question and then move out? I won't say anything else.
Yeah. Okay, one simple question. Oh.
Phil, I hope you heard some of the testimony earlier, because I was not going to ask you any questions, but then this occurred to me. In your current draft of the Delta Plan, the fifth, I believe.
Fifth.
Your plan calls for reducing reliance on the Delta.
That's statutory.
Yes. Consistent with the statute.
Yeah.
And I applaud that, of course. We heard testimony this morning, however, clear and unequivocal, that, in fact, the contractors are interested in moving back to levels which will increase exports beyond the current export from the Delta. If that, in fact, turns out to be the BDCP approach, can you foresee a scenario in which the Stewardship Council would approve a BDCP that would increase exports and find it somehow consistent with a Delta Plan that calls for reducing exports? And I think that's the train wreck I see coming.
The answer is, until BDCP is completed, it's hard to know what they're actually proposing. That's number one. Number two, there is no doubt about the fact that in the publicly visible process, we have competing demands for the highest possible level of export and the lowest possible or termination of exports. The testimony for the last couple of years has been presented to us that had those positions. Hard for me to imagine that there won't be some adjustment in water export levels, which is not, Senator Wolk, as saying that the decreased reliance is really something that falls into our Bay Delta Conservation appellate role. The appellate role is only to the decision of the Department of Fish and Game that BDCP has met the requirements of federal law, state law. And this statute suggests, but it is not explicit, that the co-equal goals and the measurements and the decreased reliance is part of that. But, you know, I don't want to hold out to you. I can't pull up a code of a statute that tells me that is. Is it, for example, if BDCP comes up with a plan that says we're going to export the entire supply of the Delta forever, I doubt that ever gets to us as an issue. That's not going to happen. Everybody's jockeying for tactical position in the negotiations and the process. That's understandable. It's kind of frustrating at public hearings when you're searching for areas of accommodation and a way through the deadlocks, but it's just reality. And I think I ought to defer to Mark on the prospects of that happening. I think he's better positioned to answer than I am.
Yeah. Thank you very much for those comments. Appreciate that, and especially highlighting the uncertainties of weather itself and trying to create reliability. So you're the final word on the subject.
Lucky me. Well, thank you, Chair Pavley.
In so many ways, you know.
Well, actually not, and that's part of my comments.
So talk a little bit about timeline, and we'd like to hear your response
I'd be happy
in the next 10 minutes.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I think if nothing else, 2 or 3 hours of testimony clarifies for me that the strong-held views about the Delta that have really defined the Delta debate for decades is still alive and well, and we need to continue to try to address everyone's concerns. Just a couple thoughts on where we are in the process and where we move forward from here. First of all, as has been mentioned, we did deliver 10,000 pages of new documents on the 29th of February. It was a very important milestone for the Bay Delta Conservation Planning process, which has been going on for, I believe, about 6 years now. So to complete a relatively complete admin draft of the proposal is a very significant milestone for us. I want to clarify that of those 10,000 pages, there are really 2 5,000-page products. First of all, an admin draft NEPA-CEQA document that does evaluate a broad range of alternatives. That includes alternatives to types of conveyance, alignments of conveyance, different types of operation of new conveyance, different configurations of habitat restoration. It also includes alternatives that would provide for through Delta conveyance and an alternative that provides for reduced exports from the Delta. So just to clarify, those are within the range of alternatives that we are currently evaluating.
And those will be included in the REIS,
that is
examining as required all different alternatives.
That's right. The second 5,000-page document is the admin draft of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan itself, and it really takes the form of the application that we would submit to the state and federal fish agencies to receive or permit clearances through the state and federal Endangered Species Acts. This document does a detailed evaluation of one specific preliminary proposal, and as it has been referred to in earlier testimony today, that proposal would be a relatively large conveyance capacity water conveyance facility, and about 110,000 acres of habitat restoration. As has also been reported today, that analysis includes this effects analysis, which goes into great detail to analyze the potential of all of the conservation measures of the BDCP to contribute to conservation and recovery of the species of concern in the Delta. The findings of this admin draft material, I think, are many and varied. Of course, we have a lot more review to do, but I think there are 2 important findings that come from our review of this material. First of all, and this has been mentioned before as well, the status quo in the Delta is clearly unacceptable. When we look at the potential effects of climate change, how that will affect temperatures and flows in the Delta, together with current trends in the Delta, we're looking at a situation where the health of the Delta will continue to decline, and we would expect that to have a commensurate effect on future water supply reliability. So clearly the time to act is now. The second most important conclusion is that under this evaluation of this preliminary proposal, we see that we can meet the conservation goals for most of the species of concern in the Delta. That doesn't mean that this is a permittable plan and this is the state's proposal. Far from it. It's a starting place. We're going to clearly have to do work on the conservation measures to get to a point that we have a solid case that we are going to contribute to the conservation of all of the species of concern, and that work starts in earnest now to adjust those conservation measures, including the form and function of a new Delta conveyance facility to provide for conservation of those species. I think one thing that gets lost in this conversation pretty easily is that what the Department of Water Resources is doing in conjunction with the Natural Resources Agency and state and federal water contractors is preparing a proposal. Ultimately, that proposal must be approved by the California Department of Fish and Game, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and U.S. NOAA Fisheries. It's up to them to determine ultimately if we have met those conservation standards, and if we don't do it, we don't have a plan, we don't have a long-term ESA approval to operate the state and federal project. So keep that in mind. It's not just us deciding, so when I don't have the last word on this, as it turns out. Let me just say a bit about where I think this is going. Clearly, we can debate whether or not exports will need to decrease or increase, what the relative contributions of 110,000 acres of habitat will be relative to flows in the Delta. What's clear to me is that we're going to have an adaptive management program within the confines of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan that allows for reaction as we learn more. Science isn't going to give us all the answers so that we can nail down a plan now that will last for 50 years. We know we're going to have to continue to advance and invest in science, and as we learn more, we're going to have to be able to react and adapt. So the trick here and our goal over the next several months is to come up with a plan that provides for that robust adaptive management, yet provides the water supply reliability certainty that our state and federal water contractors are going to need to make a business decision to invest in this program. Finally, just a little bit about context, because we focus so much on the Bay Delta Conservation Plan that we tend to lose sight in these meetings of all the other important California water issues. First of all, as Supervisor Natoli pointed out earlier, we do need to continue to invest in flood management. We're doing so with the Department of Water Resources in concert with our partnerships with local and federal agencies. We have just completed our draft Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. I think that as we review that plan with the Central Valley Flood Protection Board and work towards final adoption of that plan, it will provide a framework for investment in flood management and delta improvements and other flood programs throughout the Central Valley that will ultimately lead us to our flood management goals. Second of all, I think it's extremely important to remember that even if we reach our ultimate goals for water supply reliability as a result of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, that won't meet our overall goal for California water supply reliability. We have to continue to invest in conservation. We have to continue to invest in groundwater management and water recycling and all of those local actions that we have incorporated with and help facilitate through the state's integrated regional water management program. So it's our assessment that it's not a choice of one or the other, but we have to invest in shoring up the water supply reliability from the Delta, as well as continued investment in all of those local programs to get to our water supply reliability needs for California. And with that, I'll close. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Questions?
Mr. Cohen, thank you very much for answering my question from earlier today. I appreciate that very much. Could you just tell me to date how much has been invested in all the studies to date with respect to the dollar value of it?
on the order of $140 million have been invested in planning for the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. That includes some level of preliminary engineering for Delta conveyance to look at a variety of alternatives, but that's the general order of magnitude of investment over the 5 or 6 year process.
This issue of independence or having an objective analysis, we heard earlier from the gentleman at the Department of Interior, the Delta Science Program selects the panel. You also go to the National Academy of Scientists. Is there anything you can do in addition to these particular groups of scientists that is out there that we can get further eyeballs to look at these analysis and provide, whether it's flow, the impact on the habitat? What more can we possibly do? I mean, we've spent $140 million. At some point, you got to find some independent analysis. Is there anywhere else we can search to find that?
Well, I guess I would just point out again that, as I stated before, the state and federal fishery agencies have the ultimate responsibility to dictate the terms of the permits that we receive. So they really make the call on this. Independent science is an important part of that, so that we all have confidence in the decisions that we arrive at. Certainly, both the Delta Science program and the National Academy of Science are important players in providing that independent voice. I'd say at the end of the day, the most important thing we can do is continue to invest in a robust adaptive management program. We need to get out there and test some of these theories about what habitat can do for food production in the Delta, and have a solid science program to find out what the results will be and adapt from that. So I think it really is a matter of learning as we move along, rather than waiting for one, as Jason, I believe, said, pristine answer from science that guides the way for hitherto.
Just 3 more quick questions. Yolo County, it was stated, received $425,000 from 3 different sources to analyze the potential impacts. Are there any other dollars, realizing we have a state structural deficit, but are there any dollars somewhere where we can assist the other counties within this coalition to analyze the impacts for them?
We had a unique opportunity with Yolo County because of the crossover of the importance of the Yolo bypass to both the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan and the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. So we had an opportunity to provide some flood management dollars that we had more flexibility with to Yolo County as part of our contribution to them to help them analyze the effects of the proposal. We will continue to look for opportunities to provide those types of resources to the Delta counties and continue to engage in dialogue to do so.
And then 2 last, one question and then a point I want to make. Your quote, I wrote it down, is that the status quo is unacceptable. I believe that's what it was. Is it fair? I have made it a part. I've been in the legislature now roughly 17 months. And I've made it a point to try
expert.
No. Yeah, unfortunately, with term limits, they're calling me a veteran now, which is totally unacceptable. Yep. But I'm still continuing to try to learn this particular very complex and controversial subject. As I've toured the state as far north as north of Shasta down to San Diego, I continue to hear from scientists on both sides of this debate that the area around the Delta is unsustainable. Is that an accurate assessment?
People can mean a lot of different things by unsustainable, but yes, I think the current form of the Delta, in terms of its ability to provide for water supply reliability for California, for its ability to provide for the health and needs of a variety of important species, land and fish species to California, the current situation is unsustainable.
Well, and lastly, Madam Chair, I want to thank both of you. Chairman Eisberg, well, you've been in some controversial debates in the past with your time in the Assembly, but there's no other controversial issue than this. And to you, Mr. Cohen, whether you've been in the San Joaquin Valley or I've gone to places in Southern California, there is a lot of passion about this, and emotion about this particular subject. And you hear it from both sides. You hear it from my region. You shouldn't put fish before human beings. You see it in the stickers today. You can't drain the Delta. And I think that you have consistently been a professional, treated people with respect through this entire process, and I really want to commend you for that effort.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Senator Rubio, for joining Senator Woke and myself and others for this important discussion. Mr. Cowan, could you just briefly end in 30 seconds, walk us through a timeline for this, at least this next year, regarding the EIS, community involvement, and how people react and respond?
It's a challenge to do in brief because it really is adaptive management is being applied to our schedule as well as it must be to our program. But
we had put that term into the Delta Reform Pact.
The most important thing happening right now is this review of this 10,000 pages of material that we posted on the web a couple of weeks ago. We need the federal and state fish agencies to give us their reaction to that material, and it really will set the stage for how we move forward. Assuming that we get a relatively clean bill of health, that the methodologies that we've applied are appropriate, then we begin in earnest to talk about how we have to adjust the conservation measures in order to meet the goals of the plan for recovery of species.
Is that something that happens in the next 60 to 90 days or longer?
Again, if we get we've had this debate about science for a long time, so what I'm trying to establish here is that we need a real check to see if the science is suitable for making these decisions. And if we can get that kind of response and agreement from the federal agencies and the Department of Fish and Game, then it really is about adjusting the conservation measures. I would hope that that would happen over the next 90 days, that sort of time scale, in time to inform us. And so we can make revisions and put out a public draft of all of these materials at the end of June. That's ambitious, but that's our goal.
That would be the goal. And then it's a couple-month process where people can respond to that.
Right.
And the ultimate authority that approves the completion of the EIR and EIS is...
Ultimately, if we can stick to the schedule, then we would have record of decision, notice of determination in about February of 2013.
And the linkage between consistency with the Delta plan, how does that fit in?
So at that point in time, once we have the permits from the federal fish agencies, and most importantly from the Department of Fish and Game, that our plan meets the NCCPA standards, then we would submit that plan to the Delta Stewardship Council for their finding of consistency.
Okay, and the completion of the Delta plan is scheduled?
Well, so again, subject to the vagaries of environmental impact report. The environmental impact
because you have to do a programmatic EIR.
That's right.
This is not the last hearing.
The language is,
yes.
EIR process was not set up for planning documents in quite this way.
Correct.
But we have a programmatic, which means a planning process, not a project by project. And the planning document, fifth draft, was subject to the environmental impact report. We're still digesting all the pages of comments. That's why we're starting this week with review of potential changes in the sixth draft. Assuming there is no need for a recirculation, you're looking probably at May for possible adoption of the whole thing. If there is recirculation, that's another 45 days and probably a review period after that of a month or something like that. But this year.
Right.
All of this without determination of flows?
That's right, because the flow standard obligation of the board is an ongoing. They are not required to determine flows every day, every week, every year. They have an obligation when appropriate to do it, and as you know, they periodically, there have been 6 or 7, without talking about amendments, I think 6 or 7 large flow decisions since 1966, 67, I think was the first, and so you get these periodically. the United States EPA involvement on their own, should we fail to take action, Lord knows if that would happen, or if it did, when. But it is a possibility on water quality that they could step into if we don't.
Just to add to that, certainly as a part of a complete Bay Delta conservation plan, we would propose a set of flows and a set of rules for export criteria, together with an adaptive management program that would allow adjustment of those operational criteria and required outflows. That's the long term. In the near term, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA Fisheries are working on new biological opinions that will control operation of both the state and federal projects. They'll be developing those over the course of, I believe, the next year or so. And those will have a large statement about what flows will look like in the near term, aside from the state board process.
Right. Thank you both very much. Senator Wilk, I've suggested to Mr. O'Connor that as part of our usual policy committee schedule, we'll find a date where we can have the State Water Board come down and just address that topic for a little while with us stream flows. Thank you very much. Thank you, audience. You've been excellent and wonderful. Greatly appreciated.